Good. How are we doing? Hi, everyone. Just post in the chat, just name and where you're from. It's always interesting to see name, role, and where you're from, even. Always good to see who we've got joining the session and to see some friendly faces. We'll kick off in 1 minute. So get ready. We're going to kick off actually with an interactive exercise. So you're going to be working from the start. This isn't a nice, relaxing lunch break off you, unfortunately. Huben, nice to meet you. Karsten from Berlin. Hello, hello. Lubos based in Switzerland. Awesome. Christoph, I think you're on holiday at the moment. You should be enjoying your holiday, but great to see you. Srinivasa from India. Awesome. Elizabeth based out in Spain. Jan in Aachen. Kosovo, recognize your name at Berlin. Two in Copenhagen, second time today. Hello, Barati, I'll see you later. Awesome, recognize a few other names. I think Tim, I recognize your name. Based in Cologne, yeah, of course I do. Ashley, based out in Spain, awesome. Yeah, moved from the UK, not a bad idea. Catherine, also in the UK, awesome. Super interesting, great to see some record. Ollie as well, good to see you. I haven't spoken for a while. Yeah, it's got a lot of people based in Spain, which is nice. Conrad as well, recognize your name, and a few others as well. Good, let's jump in. Make sure we get as much from this session as possible. I think as usual, if you have come to these sessions before, you know the score. We're going to spend 10 minutes maximum on theory, and then we're going to really focus on putting this stuff into practice. Theory without practice, theory without actually building real experience is ultimately a waste of time. So we've got to put this stuff into practice. So today's going to be really interactive. Good. Let's start with a warm-up exercise. So why this talk starts with a bold claim, right? Forget the MVP, forget the minimal viable product. Why is it called that? Why have I included that in the title beyond just sort of dangling something to ignite your curiosity? Well, it's a big claim. And we'll come on to why I have included that very shortly. I just want to start with a warm-up exercise to hopefully illustrate why I want to talk about this today. So I'd like you to visualize what you think of when you hear the phrase MVP. Maybe it's an MVP you've worked on in the past or an example you've read about, for example. And what I'd like you to do is we're going to give you 1 minute to think of that MVP, and I'd like you to describe it in one single sentence. What is that MVP in one single sentence? And you can post on the chat. Whilst you're doing that, I will share the board we'll be using for today, the Miro board. Just take a minute. What is that MVP? Feel free to start posting on the chat as well. I'll read out a few examples. Careful, think of a specific example you've worked on, not a I don't want a definition. What was that thing you worked on? So specific example you've worked on. Yeah, got some good definitions, but specific example that you've worked on or you've heard of. If we get a few examples. Okay, so Tui's got an example. MVP had to meet all customer requirements before being tested by just one customer. Barati worked on an on-time dashboard to validate the idea of near real-time reporting with a simple front end connecting to an existing database. Okay, interesting. MVP for Aaron was a full scope education program. Ollie worked on a platform to manage the life cycle of electric vehicle batteries. Good. Some interesting examples there. So great to see some of those. And just interesting how people look at the concept in a slightly different way. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to post a link to a Miro board that we're going to be using today. So feel free to load that up. I'm going to be screen sharing though for the theory, the next 5 minutes. If one of Pro MBA people, if you could just repost that Miro link for me, if I know we'll get some late joiners, then that would be great. I will try and keep an eye out myself as well. Just note that down. It's super helpful. Just Tui or Ollie. Awesome, thank you. Good. Okay. I'm just going to screen share and let's talk about the MVP. So why have I said it's important to forget the MVP? Well, let's have a look at two trends that I think are really worth talking about today. Really, the landscape is changing. The product landscape is changing. There are two reasons for that. So the first one, just load this up, and hopefully this is exemplified by a few of the examples that we saw on the chat there. It's very common to fall into what we call the MVP trap. Right? The MVP in theory is about how to effectively and quickly validate a core assumption. And we've seen some great definitions that agree with that concept, right? We've seen those in the chat. It's awesome to see. But in reality, we actually tend to see the MVP manifest itself in quite a different way. And we tend to see the following problems. Look over here. So firstly, it's rarely minimal. In most cases, what we think of the minimal version, maybe it took a few weeks, even months at time, should be way faster. You know, we're talking hours or days in many cases. Secondly, an MVP is rarely viable. In many teams, it can be an excuse for just pushing out a rubbish first version of a product. It's like, hey, we know we're going to build the solution, so let's just do a sort of scrappy, buggy version of it to start, and we're just going to, you know, fill in the gaps essentially. So it's not actually viable, i.e. it's not delivering enough value to the user for them to want to use it. Thirdly, what tends to happen is we usually jump straight to a custom digital version of an MVP. Right? Most of us here work in the digital space. We immediately think, okay, let's go off and code something. Let's make something ourselves from scratch, which takes a lot longer and just shifts our focus a little bit towards how we're going to build something rather than, okay, what are we actually trying to learn here? And finally, we've got three types of risk that we need to address as product people. This is really our purpose, is to address risk. So first is value risk, like do people even want this? Secondly, feasibility risk, can we actually deliver? And then thirdly, usability. Like, can somebody actually use it enough to get value from it? What tends to happen with MVPs is, you know, think of the classic sort of Figma prototype. We focus a lot on usability, right? We sort of committed to the fact we're going to build the solution anyway, but let's prototype it in Figma and we'll test it out and we're going to improve some small stuff in the user flow or some small things related to the experience, user interface, etc. But we're not going to, you know, ask yourself, how many times have you built a prototype and then completely pivoted away from what that looks like, more or less? You know, again, the Figma prototype, sure, we might change it a little bit, but have we completely changed the type of solution and prototype we're looking at? Very rare. So we tend to have a pretty fixed idea of what we're going to build anyway. And obviously that's something that is debatable, right? In many cases, that's not the case. I'm sure many of you use the MVP properly, but that tends to be how it manifests itself. So it can become quite a dangerous term nowadays. The second trend that is really important to think about is that since 2008, where the Lean Startup came out, you know, really the key proponent of the MVP, there are now 10 times more products in the market. What is the consequence of that? Well, quite simply, a lot more competition, as it's become a lot easier to build and launch products. What's the problem with that? That means it's harder for us to differentiate. If it's harder for us to differentiate, it means it's harder for us to deliver enough user value in the form of a uniquely valuable product that our users really want to use, and even harder to then capture some of that value in the form of revenue for us as a business. Now, in turn, what that means is that we need to really be way better at validating ideas before we build them, right? We need to be really sure that we've got something that's really valuable before we commit to building it. We can't fall into the trap, right? There's no wiggle room anymore in a really highly competitive market. We can't fall into the traps of building an MVP that just doesn't make sense. We're not really learning from, you know, it's not really viable. It's taking ages to build and it's just a bit of a distraction. And, you know, rather than just jumping into building a Figma prototype and testing for small usability issues. Instead, we must do what, quote, Gigi Levi Weiss from NFX investment firm coins, earn the right to build, right? We must earn the right to build before we just jump into building something. Part of that is validating, okay, you know, is this something people want in terms of value? And also just making sure we're running the right kind of prototype to get the right kind of outcome. Good, let's jump into the, well, how do we, so we talked about, okay, some of these trends, what's the problem with the MVP as it usually manifests itself? Well, how do we prototype properly, right? Easy to criticize stuff, hard to come with solutions. So let's look at 6 specific models we can use for prototyping. I know Marty Kagan talks about 4. Personally, I think there's a few others that, you know, based on this particular second trend that we need to really think about. So how do we prototype properly? As I said, there are 6 models we can look at. Before we jump into the models themselves, you know, with these green cards you'll see here, we need to think about, well, you know, like, what makes sense for us? How do we even think about what to work on? So just understanding, well, what are we trying to validate? So let's have a look at these in a little bit more detail. And, you know, there are different ways to slice the pie in terms of how we define the prototypes. Do we group a few things together? Personally, I like this 6 framework. So sometimes we might find ourselves, if we look at this first one, in a situation where we're actually just unclear about, you know, what outcome we're even going to deliver. So looking at value risk, right? What is the actual value of what we're going to provide to someone? You know, say for example, you walk into Airbnb in the early days, and on the surface, it's okay, cool. This is an accommodation platform, right? We're an accommodation provider, but actually, that's not the outcome people are looking for when they interact with Airbnb specifically. It's for some people, not their core audience. What's the outcome? It's about a memorable experience, right? People are looking for a really truly memorable experience. So what we might do is run what we call a minimal viable offer prototype. I go through this on our YouTube channel in a lot more detail. I won't go into too much detail today. What is a minimal viable offer? Essentially, it's a statement validating, well, who are we trying to target, what their desired outcome is, and how we deliver that in a unique way. We can have a simple statement on a landing page to do that, to see, okay, are people actually interested in what we're going to be offering them? You know, think back to the first cohort I did with Prod MBA 3 years ago. There was no bootcamp, right? It was just a landing page with a statement based on, you know, helping PMs fast track their product careers. And there was 6 bullet points about the topics that we'd be covered. That was it. There was no bootcamp details. The workshops weren't planned out yet, because at that stage, it was simply saying, like, are people interested in this? Do they want that desired outcome, fast tracking their career? And secondly, do they believe that we're going to deliver it in a unique way by getting them to build a real product, and by doing so really, you know, master product principles, essentially. So that kind of situation, we might use an MVO prototype. Second prototype, maybe we're not clear on how we're going to deliver an outcome. So it's like, great, awesome. We know that our Airbnb users want a memorable experience, but like, what the hell are we going to build? Well, at this stage, you know, we might not even know what risks are involved. So we might simply look at using a low fidelity user prototype. I think just paper mock-ups, or a workshop, even a conversation with a piece of paper between you to get an idea of, okay, well, what are we trying to build? And then, okay, well, what next might we build in terms of a follow-up prototype? There's some questions coming through. Feel free to post those. I'll come on to those shortly, and also at the end of the session. So you might just do paper mock-ups. We're like, well, what the hell are we going to do? We don't know. Give a bit more definition to that. Thirdly, we might have a known problem, but an innovative solution. So think, for example, let's take the example of Grammarly in the early days. Okay, we know that people struggle with grammar, struggle with online writing, but nothing's really solved it yet, right? Apart from sending them back to school, even that waste of time in most cases. So we might go, okay, well, we know there's a problem, and it's a big problem, but we don't know whether a language analysis tool is actually going to work. So in this case, rather than putting landing pages up or sort of, doing a manual prototype, we might just build what we call a feasibility prototype. Like, can we actually do the language analysis, analyze some text, and it's going to give us some useful feedback? Because if we can't do that, then hey, we're probably not going to be successful. So we might want a feasibility prototype. Number 4, we might feel that actually the best way to do it is, okay, we validated that people want what we're offering them. Now we want to make something as close to a final digital product as possible. So we can firstly test usability risk and also a bit of value risk, getting a feel as we do user interviews for whether people are really engaging with that prototype. To do that, we can use high fidelity user prototypes, right? Think the classic Figma interactive prototype. Number 5, we might just need them to use the real thing. Figma prototype's great, but actually we don't know whether someone's going to be coming back to use that, right? Or are we being too biased because we're sitting with someone and testing, or we're doing it digitally? They're going to give us positive feedback, right? They're going to concentrate more. They're going to be exploring that application more than they would if they just found it on the internet and just browsed and clicked through very quickly themselves. So sometimes we just need to build the real thing with a live data prototype. Why is that a prototype? Because we might actually build a real application, but with some technical debt, right? I.e., we're just trying to get something live as quickly as possible with the understanding that we're going to come back and restructure it if it's a success. So sometimes that can make a huge amount of sense as well. Airbnb, good example. Great, we can make a lovely looking Figma prototype. Will people actually book accommodation? Well, we don't know until we build the real thing. So we might do a scrappy version or no-code prototype with Softer or Bubble, for example. And finally, I think one that's really underrated and missed out, the smokescreen prototype. For example, okay, if we understand, okay, what's the outcome and how, more or less what the key steps are. Let's say we're building a platform for job seekers. We sort of know what the steps are going to be. Can we offer that in a different way? Can we solve that in a different way? Right? Really address value risk here with something like a smokescreen prototype. So, if you've heard of Christian Idiodi, he's partner at SVPG, told me a really fascinating story about one of the early businesses he worked with, where they were helping build a fill roles for companies in the US, particularly big companies like McDonald's, where they have high staff turnover. So what did they do? They just manually got on the phone to people, put up a quick landing page, and essentially worked as a headhunter to fill these roles to see, okay, does that process sort of work, so that later they could then go and digitize it and automate it as much as possible. So a lot of manual work went into that, but that was the most effective way in that situation. So you've got these six prototypes, and let's jump straight into an interactive exercise. So we put this into practice, and then I'll address some of the questions that came up. So for our warm-up, well, our secondary warm-up exercise, our proper warm-up exercise, I'd like you to, we'll do this as a group actually. Imagine we're a big company that provides gardening products. If you're in the UK, think of Homebase. If you're in Germany, Bauhaus. We want to launch a digital product to help you design your garden, specifically helping you choose the right plants for it, looking at factors like, is it indoor, outdoor plants? Is it going to be shady or sunny? What kind of soil do you have, etc. Climate, obviously. So your team has validated that people see value in this solution through user interviews, and you're tasked with launching a first version and getting 1,000 paying customers. What do you do next, right? Which prototype do you run with? So let's go through each step, and for each step, I'd like you to just post on the chat. You will be using the Miro board very shortly, just for this warm-up exercise. I'd like you to post on the chat. So first question, I will set a 1-minute timer. There's no right or wrong answer, different ways. Obviously, we lack a lot of context here. You're going to have 1 minute to define what outcome do we want to achieve with this prototype. Right, we're going to go through actually an example prototype experiment card, how we define the right kind of prototype before you put this into practice on your own Miro boards. Good point. I will post the warm-up exercise for us. So 1 minute just to define what is that outcome that you would look to achieve here. We'll repost the Miro board as well. Good. You can see some nice answers coming through. Awesome. So feel free to start posting your answers if you haven't done so already. I'll read a few out. Excellent. So interesting here. We've got a few answers, well, a few different answers. So Laura said feature validation ranking. So she's talking specifically about the outputs actually in this case. Better answer perhaps might be what's the specific outcome? For example, Gregor, what's the biggest value? There's some way of identifying value. So we're rephrasing actually what Laura was getting at in terms of, okay, what features are really important. Tim, are they actually going to use it? So if users really enter their personal garden dimensions, for example, are they actually using it when we build the thing? Others looked at, okay, to a great one, get customers to put down their credit card details. Are they actually going to pay? Okay, great. They said they like this idea. Will they actually pay for it? Good. And again, there's, Thanos, are customers going to use it? Excellent. And there's no right or wrong answer here. Ultimately, we want to get paying customers, but we might break that down and say, well, can we get people to even sign up for it first, just to validate, yep, definitely they like the value. Secondly, can we get them to actually use it? And thirdly, can we get them to put down credit card details to buy the plants, for example? Depends how you think you break it down, completely up to you. So again, no right or wrong answer there. Good. Let's look at the next exercise. Again, based on that conversation or based on your own approach, again, there's no right or wrong answer. I'm going to set another 1 minute timer. And I'd like you to think about which is the biggest risk to address for the final product to work. What do you think the biggest risk is in this case? We've got limited context. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. So I'd like you to define that risk at another minute and explain why you think that is the biggest risk. Awesome. Feel free to start posting your answers. Okay, just a warm-up exercise, so don't worry. We'll get way less time than I'm going to give you for the real exercise coming up. Good. Let's have a look at some of these. So Hack wrote, feasibility risk, understand if our algorithms can provide good enough recommendations. Yeah, very good logic. Feasibility risk does seem like a big one for sure. Harleen, value risk, is the product really valuable for customers? Yeah, good. So value risk there. Mahmoud, value risk, are people going to actually get what they paid for essentially? Jason, interesting. Biggest risk is that average customers are not gardeners. We had to hire a landscape architect to do our gardens, for example. Good. Which would we place that in? Jason, just specifically, if you could answer that. So biggest risk is that average consumers are not gardeners. Which risk could we define that as? Interesting, you said feasibility. Yes, can we actually deliver? Sort of relates to value as well, like are we getting the right kind of value with this specific solution? Maybe not. Feasibility as well. I think it's probably a bit of both actually in that case. Akaria, usability. Yeah, potentially as well, right? How are we helping them design their garden in this platform in some way or visualize that? For example, I think it's probably touches on all of them actually in this case. Good, some really nice answers there. Absolute cost, and is the risk really dependent on the market? Yeah, very good argument. This is obviously a slightly simplified version of it, and again, we lack context here as well. And in the markets be very different. Exactly, soil, amount of sunshine, etc. Do we have the right plants for that? We might go market specific Good. Great. Let's look at the next exercise, part 3 of the prototype experiment card. Based on that risk that you've addressed, which prototype format do you think will best address our key risk? So I'd like you to define the model, e.g. live data prototype, and then explain why you think that prototype model makes sense. Let's do a 2-minute timer with our slightly limited Miro music in the background. Remember to use the specific prototype models we've got here and explain what, why you chose that model. Bit of detail around also, is it smoke test? Okay, well, what is that? Awesome. Some really nice ideas here. Some people don't need to be in this workshop. Go enjoy your lunch break. No, I'm kidding. There is value coming up. Some really nice example. And again, there's no right answer, right? There's no right answer actually in this case. Depends on the context a lot. Look at a few examples that we've got. I really liked, God, I can't remember who it was, one of the early ones. Srinivasa, let me just feature this. So Srinivasa wrote smokescreen prototype so we can have actual humans suggest the gardening solution initially. Ollie, I think, did similar one where it was having a landing page and then having like real people giving the advice in the background. Makes a huge amount of sense for me. Some people said, well, what about actually a low fidelity user prototype with demo in store? Yeah, it could make sense, right? Because it's such an open thing, right? It's such an innovative solution. We may find that actually the whole concept of this sort of algorithmic 3D suggestion people just do not understand it. And we may need to rethink the solution. Yeah, great. Could be a valid one as well. We may look at feasibility prototypes. So Sarah, feasibility prototype, getting the recommendations right will help build trust with our customers. Yeah, obviously we've got to make sure that we can make this work as well. So again, maybe something that we work on. Excellent. Jason, yeah, good point. This is hard. Reminds me of IKEA with building your kitchen. So I want to have high fidelity where I can talk to users and watch them use it in a garden center. Yeah, good. Maybe an argument in this case to start with high fidelity user prototype, despite me taking the piss out of that, just to get a feel for how people, what kind of thing might they want with the solution, do lots of iterations on that, and then go, okay, yeah, actually, yeah, let's do this as a nice 3D model, or we may even just be able to do a simple version of it. And look at parallel markets as well, a good place to start, like IKEA. Excellent. Step 4, how will we measure success? So I'd like you now we'll take a minute to define a specific metric that will let you know the prototype has or has not succeeded. If you're not looking at feasibility prototypes or any of the other non-feasibility prototype, think of like a key user action or key user or business metric we might be driving towards. So just 1 minute to define your key metric, and again, keep posting on the chat. Remember to be really concrete. So Atif, you said people successfully going through the steps of the prototype. What percentage do you think would be a success? What are those key steps, for example? Just 20 seconds or so. Good, some nice examples here, very varied as well, really interesting to see. So Christoph said, if we're doing an MVO, then number of people who sign up, who see valued in the promised outcome, sign up conversion. Bharati looked at number of customers, look at different segments potentially. Sorry, number of customers, I completely lost it. Sorry, it somehow moved the page. I will come back to that. I can't actually track it down. What else have we got? Ollie, number of users sharing results or recommending the service on social media. So looking at referral would be a key metric. I wouldn't say the number one metric, but definitely something there. Srinivasa, based on suggesting a smoke screen prototype, key metric she'd like to target is how many users have actually implemented the solutions we've suggested. Awesome. Great to look at, okay, are they checking out and buying the plants, but are they going to put it into practice? We might use some sort of qualitative metric, right, NPS, or reach out to them directly for maybe even an interview. Awesome. And Tui, no, let's look at somebody else. Sylvia, daily active use, customer retention rate. Yeah, maybe. I wouldn't say for this specific prototype, because ultimately we just want to convert them. Are they actually ordering stuff? So are they designing the garden, ordering the stuff, and then planting it, whatever it's making the changes to the real garden in some way would be the key steps that I'd be looking at. Obviously defining those in a little bit more concrete way. And also things like satisfaction rating, NPS, also very valid, because again, we want to see, do they actually go and implement that? We can't track that, we can't go and take a photo of their garden, but we might do that with NPS or surveys, or we could do something clever and do, a sort of photo competition so that we can see who actually implemented it, this kind of thing. Good, great. Final exercise before we put this into practice. We are not going to do this today, but just to show you what the final step is. So once we are clear on, okay, why are we doing all this stuff? What is the outcome as part of this experiment card? Firstly, once we're clear on the outcome, once we've explicitly addressed the risk, so it gives us a lot of focus then about, okay, which ball game are we playing? Is it feasibility? Is it value? And then that's going to help us frame, well, what kind of prototype do we think makes a lot of sense for this specific risk? Fourth, coming actually back to the outcome, okay, well, how are we going to measure success? What's really important? How do we know whether this prototype succeeds or fails? Then finally, we might break that down a little bit more in terms of, okay, what are the key steps? If it's non-feasibility, even with a feasibility prototype, what are the key steps in our user journey, and are there corresponding metrics there? So breaking it down, if you looked at this, maybe we look at sign up, design, browse, design your garden, order the plants, actually do the planting, for example, maybe key steps there. So some interesting ideas there. Good, but enough of listening to me, which I'm sure has got boring after 36 minutes. Final thing before we go into putting this into practice, just as a call to action, if anybody wants to take real action, really put this stuff into practice, then we have 2 places available for our evening session for the next cohort, Product MBA, starting in September, where we're really fast tracking your path to head of product. There are 2 links here, 2 actions to take. I don't know how they've managed to move, but first thing, follow me on LinkedIn. Not literally follow me. I post every day about product and entrepreneurship and leadership as well. So feel free to follow me. Second, if you do want to take action and look at whether Product MBA might be a good fit, then do click this link and you can learn more. As I said, we're about to sell out, but you might get one of those last few places there. Without further ado, let's jump into today's challenge. So at this point, I'm going to repost the Miro link for anybody that's joined late and has no idea what's going on. Fortunately, I can't pin links. Today's challenge, I'm going to be presenting you with 2 hypothetical business challenges, and you're going to be expected to then, sorry, the next course, Catherine, will be January the 23rd. After that will be the beginning of April. Reach out to me on LinkedIn as well if you just want to book a call and learn more about this, about Pro MBA, sorry, as well as this. So you're going to be expected to fill out your own prototype experiment card. If you come down here, you're going to see a board with 2 columns, and Atif has been the perfect assistant, already added his name. So you can take your own board. Try and go roughly alphabetical. So if your name is like S, go sort of down here somewhere. If it's A for Atif, then take the first board, B for Barati. Excellent. You know the drill by now, most of you. Good. So you're going to fill out your own prototype experiment card. Exercise 1. And again, there are different ways to approach this. So do not feel intimidated by posting something you think is wrong or silly. It's absolutely not the case. Exercise 1. You are part of Amazon's leadership team in 2014, not 2044, and you're looking at launching what will later become Alexa, what is now Alexa. You believe that the market trend towards in-home IoT devices is an opportunity to both gather rich data about your customers, as well as embed Amazon products in our customers' daily habits. Emerging voice recognition technology seems like an interesting way to take advantage of that market trend. You're going to have 10 minutes to define, well, what's that outcome in that first prototype that you think you should build. I will set a 10-minute timer, and I'd like you to do the 5 steps of that product experiment card. I will also repost the description of this exercise. I'm actually going to leave this up on the screen for a while. I will stop screen sharing shortly just to review what people are doing. Remember to put your name top left of your board, that little blue card, so that nobody works on the same. Two minutes to go, and then we're going to review. just start to wrap up there. Don't worry about getting all of it done. Just as many steps as possible done to good quality. Good. Let's have a look at a few examples. Really interesting to see very different thinking about this. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. We have pretty limited context. And as usual with product, it's never crystal clear what we should do. Never crystal clear. Anyone that says it is lying to you. They're selling you a silver bullet. So let's look at a few examples. Someone's had a few that drew my attention. Okay, let's have a look at Rubens to start. Everybody wants to follow my screen. Actually, Ruben, you don't have your name on the board. No worries. Let's look at Laura. So, what is the outcome that Laura defined? Understanding how users want to use and take action in their everyday lives with voice recognition technology. What did Laura think the biggest risk was? Usability risk, because adoption is key to the viability of the product. We need to understand users' value and the progress they're wanting to make. Voice recognition technology should be low friction, high accuracy. Okay, I saw quite a few people use usability here. Why do you think I might call out the type of risk identified here? Any ideas, Laura, or anybody else that wants to contribute as well? Jason said we don't know if it's feasible yet. Yeah, we'll come on to that shortly. Why might I think value risk here? I think it's more value. Your desirability side is the same kind of ballpark. Why is that? Because part of the value proposition in this case is it's a voice assistant. Again, how it depends how you define it, obviously. I would suggest that the value proposition, that a core part of that is actually the way the value is delivered, right? It's a voice assistant for various different jobs that you want done, essentially, right? Whether it's checking the weather or what the traffic's going to be like on my drive to work. So it feels like it's saying, okay, well, actually, do people get value? Do they like this concept of a voice assistant? Usability, sure, might be part of it. If you've got a super creepy, like murderer sounding voice, then sure, that's usability, right? They're just going to find it intimidating or not sure what to use. Then fair enough, usability. But the core thing seems to me actually value risk in this case. Tom, really good point, right? Tom said nobody needs such a product. That could be a value risk. Yeah, I think the reason why I would call it value risk and not usability is that it's not clear there's not like an individual specific thing like checking the weather that I think we do elsewhere. It's about, do we value the frictionlessness of a voice assistant, right? The ease of that as a piece of value. But again, you can slice that different ways. It's just my approach personally. The second group of answers we saw. Go to Angela. So Angela, what outcome? We want to see new technology adoption or some daily habits integrated in their daily habits. Great outcome to drive toward. Maybe not something you do in the first version for sure, but there's something there. Which is the biggest risk to address? Value risk. So yeah, to be successful, the product needs to address customer pain points in some way. And I thought final answer I wanted to look at was Carsten. This is really valid. It's a tough case study in this case. So Carsten, what's the outcome here? More sales of Amazon products, especially IT related products, and find out if users accept voice interfaces. Yeah, it's this big thing about like, is voice this vehicle? Is it something that people like? And Carsten interestingly said all three, because great point, back in 2014, this was a whole new thing. The fact you've got a random voice in your house, you've got feasibility risk. Like, can we actually, sure, we know that voice technology works, but does it actually work in this specific context? We've still got feasibility, value risk. Like, do people actually like the vehicle of voice? And then usability. Do we have issues of, obviously related to also feasibility? Like, is the quality good enough? Is it easy to people understand how to use it? Do we need to tweak the tone or whatever it might be, for example? So it's quite mixed in this case. And again, that's why I think we'd actually in this case probably have to we might start with a quick feasibility risk and then get some basic version in for maybe a specific thing like checking the weather every morning, to sort of get a feel for whether people value it and whether there's any usability issues we could solve there. Good. I'd love to review a lot more of these. I'm trying to cover as many people as possible. Yeah, a bit tricky today. And again, there's really different ways to slice the pie. Ashley, great question. If we're talking about the value coming from the repeated high frequency use, would that make it more of a usability risk? It feels like, it still comes back to value for me. Like, is voice, obviously because we are making it so frictionless, it sort of takes the usability argument out of it. But I can see why everyone would argue, why lots of people are arguing usability. I think it's a mix of the two potentially. Good. We've only got 5 minutes left, so I would like to do a bit of exercise 2. Exercise 2, very simple. I'm just going to go back up to our challenge for today. I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to think of an existing or upcoming business challenge that your product team will need to solve. Which specific prototype model would you like to choose? Just 2 to 3 minutes. I'd like you to define the outcome. So step 1 and 2, the outcome, the prototype model, and why you chose that specific model. Awesome. So I've also got a naughty puppy who has run into the office. Right, let's do just a very quick review of one example, and I'm going to suggest actually we get in touch, with me for me to review yours properly. Just a quick example from Ashley. What outcome do you want to achieve? Are people willing to pay for curated content programs? Which prototype did Ashley choose? What's the biggest risk involved? So completely right. Value risk. Yeah, are people actually, is this something they seem to value? And trying to ultimately get money down before you provide the core product experience itself makes a lot of sense. Like that's the example I gave that I did 3 years ago with Prod MBA. So awesome. We're going to have to wrap up there, unfortunately. I know some of you have got meetings to go to. If you want me to review your prototype experiment card, what I suggest doing is add me on LinkedIn and send me a message, and I will get back to you on that in the next few days. I'm happy to review it and send some feedback. Second thing, as with everything we're covering, it's so easy just to not bother doing this stuff. It's really easy. I really suggest taking this and putting it into practice with your team. Even if you're in a really sort of non-product led environment, there's always experiments you can run if you just take the initiative and just go and do it. So it's great for your learning. Hey, if it doesn't happen, you can't put it into practice for whatever reason, then that's fine. At least you're learning, at least you're pushing your own career forward. And as I said, final thing, we've got a few places open for Prod MBA in September. If not, you can join in January. If anybody wants a naughty puppy, then feel free to have one. Thank you all for joining. I'll hang around for 5-10 minutes for questions as well. Tui, will the template be public? I'm going to submit it to the Miro editorial board, but it always takes a few months. Sarah, thanks for joining. Ashley, awesome. Thanks to join. Most practical session I've been in a long time. That is exactly the feedback I'm looking for. That's great to hear. I am glad that people are becoming fed up with endless presentations run by Product School. So happy to help. Cheers, Adam Barati. Awesome. Tim, yeah, I do have that support, although he's a bit of a distraction. Cheers, Simon. Looking forward to seeing you on the course as well. Catherine, yeah, feel free to have the puppy. Thanks everyone for joining as well. As I said, I'll stick around for some questions. Good question, actually, Oliver. So I don't know if you're going to hang around, Ollie. Just let me know, and we can cover that question. Does everyone get to play with the dog during the? You can babysit the dog when we're on holiday if you'd like, Tom. Awesome. Any questions before we sign off today? No, all good. Ollie, you know what I suggest with your question? Give me a bit more context over LinkedIn and I will have a think about it. Good question around client expectations, a tricky one. We'll cover it now, actually. We'll cover it now. Let me just grab Hack's question. Let me just feature this and we'll jump into it. When you are building a tool for developers, how do we test the value in the idea stage? Is user interviews the only path? Yeah, user interviews are good for getting, user interviews are a really good idea for generating ideas. In terms of the specific value, this is week 1 to 3 of Prod MBA, actually. I always, in this kind of case, I would suggest a landing page with like a pretty good idea of what you're going to be offering them in terms of the solution, in terms of developers, because obviously it's quite specific what the value is. Landing page in this case should solve that. Are you getting people signing up? Can you get pre-sign-ups, pre-sales, that kind of thing? User interviews help us generate ideas and insights about what we might offer, but we need to actually put something in front of them and see whether they're willing to use it or pay for it ultimately. Angela, sorry, where can I find more information about the prototype models? There's an article by Marty and SV. Sorry, just get rid of the puppy. On flavors of prototype. It's pretty limited. I think it's a bit of a waste of time, to be honest. Good overview, but nothing more than we covered today. I would suggest best thing to do with this stuff is when you use the experiment template we've just had, and when you say, okay, great, I want to do a smoke test, but I'm not really sure exactly what to do or how, just go and Google articles. There's loads of nice case studies on different types of smoke tests, for example, so that you're learning and then applying rather than just getting lots of theory and then not doing anything with it would be my suggestion there. Siad, so you don't sure how to pronounce. Before creating a prototype, one has to define a value proposition for the product. Discover, validate, and build MVP. What are the steps involved for discovery? Week 1 to 3 of Pro MBA. I will share though one of our templates so you can get a really nice actionable board here. What do we suggest doing? This is a whole big another conversation. Because of these trends and changes, it's really important to do discovery work to actually discover a unique insight. You can't just sit on a lean canvas or a business plan and come up with some brilliant insight. It has to come from speaking to people. Sometimes you come up with something clever, but usually it comes from deep understanding of a market. That comes from speaking to lots of people. So I'd say speak to lots of people, and then we've got a nice framework that I will share with you now for aggregating your answers into a product vision and a strategy, and then an MBO, right, that you go and test out with the market. Achai, do you recommend any prototyping books where we can improve knowledge? I mean, sure, there's loads of books on this stuff. Is it going to help you that much? My suggestion, I think, as with Angela, use the template to say, okay, like when next time you're thinking of building something, or you have some idea that prototyping might be helpful, start with that outcome. Okay, what are we trying to achieve? What kind of prototype? And then I just Google, look at articles and examples of smoke test prototypes, for example, to just go and put it into practice, essentially. Awesome. Let's wrap up there. I think, Ollie, actually best to give me a bit of context over LinkedIn, because like depends a lot on the clients you're working with. But yeah, happy to answer that. And as I said, if anybody wants some feedback, then sure, there's a dog fight going on. They've somehow escaped. Then I will happily send you feedback over LinkedIn as well. If not, have a great day, and thank you for joining as well. See you all in the next session.